It is really my pleasure to introduce my colleague and friend, Dr. and Professor Katharine Hayhoe, who is delivering our Taplin lecture. Katharine is an atmospheric scientist whose research focuses on understanding the impact of climate change on people on the planet, and also is a distinguished professor and endowed chair in public policy and public law in the Department of Political Sciences at Texas Tech University. Katharine is also the chief scientist at the Nature Conservancy, the largest environmental NGO in the world. I think the largest, yes. So there's all those hats. In addition, Katharine has written a number of books, given TED Talks with over 4 million views, and hosted a PBS digital series called Global Weirding. Katharine is a leader in understanding how we communicate and perceive and deal with climate change, and how to do it in a very constructive way. Not only that, Katharine is a bona fide scholar, is a fellow of the American Geophysical Union, which is sort of the foremost body in geophysical sciences in the United States and globally. And, very importantly, a fellow of the Canadian Meteorological and Oceanography Society, our neighbors to the north, from which place we borrowed Katharine. So, in short, Katharine talks about why climate change matters and what we can do to fix it, and the title speaks to why we really were excited to have Katharine here. So I am delighted to invite Katharine to the stage and take over and really take us for a great ride. So thank you, Katharine. You're on.
Thank you so much, Gabe. It's so great to be back here. I don't think I've been here since before COVID, BC. Why is hope important? That's what I'm going to be talking about today. But before I do that, I want to hear from you. So go ahead and take out your phone. If you haven't turned the ringer off, you can go ahead and do that right now. There's always somebody, and sometimes that somebody is me. Take a picture of that QR code. If for some reason that doesn't work, you can type in pollev.com/Katharine. But you do have to spell Katharine correctly. The last time I tried explaining it to somebody at Starbucks, I said Katharine with 2 A's. I got a cup that said K-A-A-T-H-E-R-I-N-E. So now I just tell them my middle name, which is Anne. So once you've gotten there, you'll see the first question. And the first question is just asking you, just a second, here we go. Who are you? How many undergraduate students, graduate students, or postdocs, faculty, staff, community members, and other? All right, we have a really big turnout from graduate students and postdocs. Excellent. A lot of faculty researchers, fair number of undergrads, 20% of you are undergrads, community members, and other. Okay. Now, I have another question for you. The questions are getting progressively harder. Did you attend Senator Bill Frist's lecture last October? The reason why I'm asking you that, and I would just point out the results here are anonymous. So you can freely answer, no, you missed it, or you didn't hear about it. Nobody knows who you are. The reason I asked about that is because, first of all, that was the other lecture in this series this year. It was the same lecture series. But it's because Senator Frist is actually the board chair for the Nature Conservancy. So you're getting a double dose. And if you haven't watched his talk, I highly recommend it because he is a medical doctor who performed one of the first lung transplants in the country back in the day. And he is sold out on the benefits of nature-based solutions for human health. That is a fascinating topic of how our health can benefit from nature. And so that was what he talked about. I'm going to be talking about something different, but I encourage you to check out that talk if you missed it. All right. Now, I warned you that this is getting harder. You have to give me a word now, but just one word, not 2 words. One word. Describe what you work on or what you study in one word. Now, you can see why I asked for one word, right? It's because this is a Wordle. And the more people say climate or ocean, the bigger those words are. So we've got a great representation, I see, from climate. Oh, and communication, too. Excellent. But I love that we have so many different things here. So we've got biodiversity, we've got adaptation, we've got glaciers and solar and engineering and development. We've got darkness. That's a fascinating topic. We've got something I can't even pronounce. That's a first. Geophysics, government, policy, anatomy, justice, history. History is so important, understanding how humans react to things in the past. Excellent. Okay, now I've got one more question for you, and this is probably the hardest question. This is something I think about a lot, and you probably too, given what you study. When you open up the news, or you hear a talk or a conversation, or when I even just say the words climate change, how do you feel? How do you feel when you just hear the words climate change come across your radar? I first asked this question after I wrote a book called Saving Us back in 2021. I had written that book because the number one question that I've been getting, no matter who I was speaking to, whether it was fellow climate scientists, whether it was students, whether it was gardeners or botanical artists or healthcare professionals or even Catholic nuns, I have a wide variety of talks, as you can tell. The number one question I was getting is, what gives you hope? So I wrote a book specifically talking about what gives us hope. And then, as you always do after you've written a book, I sort of had a bit of a crisis in my first talk. I was like, does anybody care? Did I write the wrong book? So I was speaking to a group of parents at a science museum, and I was doing so virtually because it was during the pandemic, and I thought, I'm actually going to ask them this. I'm going to ask them, when I say climate change, how do you feel? And I really should have copied their responses here, because I don't think you could tell the difference. I really don't. And so since then, I've gone on to ask all kinds of people, how do you feel when I say climate change? And I've analyzed the results. And with sample size of several thousand, adding yours to it now, 200 or so, over 90% of the answers I get are definitely negative. Over 90%. And this is for any audience. It could be climate adaptation specialists working with cities. It could be mental health professionals helping us try to feel better about it. We all feel this way. So as the harms from climate impacts and the opposition to climate action intensifies, it's very easy to feel overwhelmed, isn't it? And powerless. Because the more you know about this issue, we look back in history and we know that the warming we're seeing today is unprecedented in human history, right? We have never seen changes happen this fast before in our history. In fact, the closest analogy we have, going back about 55 million years, the best estimates are that it was happening about 10 times more slowly than today. And it isn't just about the average temperature of the planet. We also see that it's affecting things like the air we breathe, the wildfire smoke coming across the border, the water that we drink, more and more places facing water crises, the food that we eat and its nutritional content, the buildings and roads and systems we use that were built for a planet that doesn't exist anymore, the nature that is increasingly under pressure from human development, exploitation, and climate change. And it's not just the nature that we see outside here, it's also the nature that covers 70% of our planet, where so much of our resources come from, the oxygen we breathe, all of that comes from the ocean. So it's no exaggeration to say that we're conducting an unprecedented experiment with the only home we have. And who wouldn't feel this way? If we see just how bad things are going, and then every time we open the news in the morning, it looks like this, right? People these days say, how are you doing? And as long as I know them moderately well, my answer these days is, I'm doing as well as you can when every morning you wake up and you say, what fresh horrors does today hold? So really, this is sort of how I feel most days. And so I'm going to ask you another question, and again, your answers are anonymous. Do you feel like this too every day, or a lot of days, or once in a while, or are you just successfully suppressing this? All right, we got a couple of successful suppressors. And we got a lot of days, yep. Once in a while and every day. Here's the thing, though. Science is clear that the choices we make today matter more than ever. Science literally says, and this is a quote from the IPCC report, every action matters. Every bit of warming matters. Every year matters. And every choice matters. So if we know what's happening, and we know why it's happening, and we pretty much know what to do about it. I mean, there's always room for a few extra solutions, but honestly, we have most of it already covered. Why are we not acting at scale, right? I want to introduce you to one of the most important equations that I think we're missing. This equation has nothing to do with nonlinear fluid dynamics, has nothing to do with radiative transfer. It has nothing to do with discount rates or macro or microeconomics. The most important equation I think we're missing is the one that connects our head to our heart to our hands. So much of where we live is in our head, isn't it? Everything we've just talked about is in our head. Climate is changing. We have all the data. We have all the facts. Humans are responsible. We know. We've checked every other possible cause. The impacts are dire, and every day we learn more about just how dire they are, how they affect our physical health, our mental health, disease, the economy, water, food, you name it. I mean, nowadays, it's hard to find something that climate change doesn't affect. So we do have to understand what's happening. That's important. If we didn't understand what's happening, why would we want to fix it? But the point is that's not enough. How do we know it's not enough? Because how long have we known what's happening? We've known what's happening for a very long time. These are the real people. This is not where you dress your family up and you go take old-timey photos in black and white. These are the real people who figured out back in these days that digging up and burning coal back then produces heat-trapping gases that are building up in the atmosphere, wrapping an extra blanket around the planet. Eunice Foote did measurements with glass tubes in her backyard that scientists today have recalculated and determined that you could derive climate sensitivity from her observations. Svante Arrhenius, in his spare time between winning a Nobel Prize in physical chemistry, took the weekends to calculate the first climate model by hand. He calculated just how much each latitude band of the world would warm if you increased CO2 levels by 50% or doubled or tripled. After the first year, his wife packed up and left. I take that a little personally because I do climate modeling myself, but I would just like to say for the record, I set up the runs and then I do go have dinner with the family and then I might check them at night. But I don't spend all my weekends doing this. And then Guy Callendar was a British engineer who, in between all the engineering he did, decided to write around the world and collect all the weather station data around the world and published a paper in 1937 where he said, it's a very interesting read, he essentially said, you're not going to believe this, but I'm going to show you that the world is warming because of human emissions of what he called carbonic acid, which we call CO2 today. So why wasn't this enough? The oil companies knew, right? The auto companies knew. Jim Hansen told everybody about it. And Michael Oppenheimer did too. He was right there as well. Back in 1988, Time magazine put it on their cover. What else are we missing? Well, part of what we're missing is the fact that over that time, our world has changed radically. If you could think back as far as 1994, and I realize there are some people in this room who cannot think back that far, so I'll tell you what the world looked like back then. It was utopic, if you can say that, compared to today. The average Democrat was closer to the average Republican than they were to the tails of their own party. The Pew Foundation did this analysis for a couple of years, 2011, 2017, the people who voted in 2017, and then they stopped doing the analysis. What do you think this looks like today? So how does this relate to climate? Well, back in February 2020, remember that? That was just before the pandemic. Back in February 2020, the most polarized issues in the United States, where Republicans, the red dot, and Democrats, the blue dot, were the farthest apart, according to the Pew Foundation, they kept on doing this research, were climate change and environmental protection. And it had been that way for over a decade at that point. Then the pandemic happened. And this was my favorite cartoon. As long as we just provide the facts to the American people, and over there you have the climate scientists. Because we've been providing the facts for how long? Since the 1850s. So I was not surprised at all that by August of the same year, the coronavirus outbreak was right up there with the most polarized issues, along with racial issues and ethnic inequality, and guess what? Climate change. And then fast forward to this past year, this is the most recent study they have. What do we have? We have gun violence, we have immigration, and oh yes, we have climate change still there. Why is this relevant? It's relevant because too often we still operate on a completely outdated theory. The theory that people are just blank slates, and if we just tell them the right information, they'll just write it on the slate in their brain. Why do we operate under this assumption? Because with a lot of science, it works. Say that you make a new discovery about dark matter. You discover that it really is axions, or that it isn't, it's some new particle we hadn't heard of, and you tell people about it. What's going to happen? Most people will be like, oh, okay, right? Because for most of us, our minds are sort of a blank slate when it comes to dark matter, and if scientists tell us it's something that they've just discovered, we're like, okay, we'll write axions, or we'll write whatever other particle you tell us on there, and we'll move on with our life. But when it comes to highly polarized issues, we're not a blank slate. And in fact, research that Dan Kahan did at Yale, back quite a while ago in 2012, he said public apathy over climate change is often attributed to the fact that people don't get it. They aren't educated, they don't know enough science, they're just not smart enough. And this is why I love the social science. We conducted a study to test this, and we found no support. In fact, what they found is that the people who were most literate in science were what? Most divided. Most divided, because the smarter we are, the better we are at going out and finding the information that proves that we're right. This is most obvious in the US, but research since then has found that this is also prevalent in other countries. This one study found that across 56 different countries, the impact of education and experience on what people thought about climate change was dwarfed by their values, their ideologies, their worldviews, and their political affiliation. And another study found that when people who are politically liberal are more educated, they tend to be more concerned about climate change. But in rich countries, right-wing ideology attenuates these positive effects. And in the US, it even reverses it. So this explains why, when I say on social media, climate is changing, humans are responsible, the impacts are serious, and we need to act now, a lot of the responses look like this. It's not coming from people who are stupid at all. It's not coming from people who aren't educated either. Well, maybe some of them. But a lot of these are coming from people who are actually quite smart, but they've decided that because of who they are, they can't accept the reality of this issue. So that brings us to the second term of the equation. We have the head, but what else do we need? We have to have the heart. So when it comes to the heart, we often think that people don't care about this issue. We often think that the world kind of looks like this. You know, me and all of us, we're the blue, right? And then all those other people out there, they're not worried about it at all, right? But if we look at the data, it turns out that's not the case. Here's the data from the Yale Program on Climate Change Communication, specifically for this county. 73% of people in this county are worried about climate change. You might say, well, what does the country look like? This is what the country looks like. About 2/3 of people across the US are worried. What does the world look like? Here, the pink is 60%, not 50%. Just about everybody in the world, except for a few countries where literally they don't know if they could, wake up and feed their family tomorrow, are worried. And in fact, many are very worried. A new survey just this past year found that globally, 80% of people around the world want their country to do more. 78% think they should protect people from the impacts. 72% want their country to speed up the transition to clean energy. So all too often, we think people need to be more worried. And so our communication focuses on trying to make not worried people worried. But what does this data show you? Most people are already worried, but they're not activated. In fact, when the Yale researchers went on to actually segment people who are worried, they were able to put a number on the number of people in the United States who are activated. What number do you think that was? Remember, 2/3 are worried, 8% are activated. 8%. So if you want to make a difference, would your biggest focus be on moving the people who claim they were not worried, about half of whom are probably very worried, but they're just suppressing it successfully, which may include some of you? Would you focus on moving people from the not worried to the worried, or would you focus on moving people from the worried to the activated? Hopefully the answer is obvious, right? Moving people from worried to activated, though, is more worry going to do it? No, in fact, more worry makes it worse. Isn't that interesting? And I actually have a real-life experiment to show you that. So in Canada, we had a really bad wildfire season a couple of years ago, right? And during that season, wildfire smoke covered most of our country and a lot of this area too, right? So you would think that people would be more worried afterwards, right? But here's the thing. Do you think that you can stop wildfires that are burning across half of northern Canada? Who here feels like they can do that single-handedly? Nobody, right? So what actually happened was the level of worry, and we had an election, so they were actually polling people over what are you voting for. The level of worry actually dropped. Why? Because people didn't think they could do anything about it. So here's a study that shows something sort of very obvious, but it makes this point. This is a figure where on the left-hand side, it's asking people, are you willing to act? So are you willing to move from the blue to the green category? Are you willing to move from worry to activate? And then on the bottom, we have something called perceived efficacy, which is basically, do you think it matters? That's what efficacy means. Do you think it matters? Well, what do you see here? There is a pretty strong correlation, and this is just one study. There's a lot of other studies that looked at this, between being willing to do something if you think it makes a difference, and if you think that you can't make a difference to wildfires consuming half the country, then why would you do anything about it? So we're going about this completely backwards. We're loading up on all of the bad news, and what that does is it causes people who are worried to actually freeze and become more paralyzed, and actually increases inaction. Isn't that wild? It is exactly the opposite from what we think we need to do. So if that doesn't work, if loading up that wheelbarrow of scary facts and dumping it on people doesn't work, and believe me, I am a scientist, I have that wheelbarrow, I have tried it. If they're not worried, it might work a bit. I've talked to people where they're like, oh, we had a climate scientist come. They showed this paleoclimate data going back millions of years, and man, it was scary. And then I'm like, okay, so what are you doing? Oh, well, we're not doing anything about it. I mean, what are you supposed to do about it? That's the cycles of the earth. And I'm like, oh no, we are the cycles of the earth today. We have a lot that we can do. So what do? Well, so often, we've got people who are worried. But what the data shows is that they haven't made what I think of as the head-to-heart connection. So where does worry reside? It often resides in our head, right? We think about things that make us worried. We have thoughts, concerns, we worry about them. People are worried, and then when you ask them, do you think climate change will also affect plants and animals and nature? People say, yeah, I absolutely think it'll affect nature. What about people who live in the future? Yes, definitely people who live in the future. What about people who live over there? Yeah, it'll affect them too. And then the researchers asked a very important question. Do you think climate change will affect you? Yeah, this is the head-to-heart gap. Unless you think that this is a US thing, here again is the will climate change harm future generations, and will it harm you personally? See that? It's a global issue. So what do we have to do? We have to make that head-to-heart connection by talking about it not in a psychologically distant way, but in a psychologically proximate way. Like what? Like talking about what's happening now, not in the future. What's happening here, not over there. What's happening to things we care about. And one of the best examples I love is what Gabe does. He plays hockey, and with a bunch of guys who are not quite sure about whether climate change was serious, but they started to complain about how you can't play pond hockey anymore, and the outdoor rinks are melting. And I mean, I'm somebody who grew up with an outdoor rink in my backyard, and man, you don't have that anymore where I grew up either. So making that proximate, and then there was that other study done right here talking about the lake on the ice, or so the ice on the lake here, and how people could see that that ice was coming in later and lasting shorter. Making it relevant to people's lives, closing that gap, talking about how your health is being affected, or your food is being affected, or chocolate or matcha tea or Japanese rice, fertility rates, dementia risk. I mean, the list is endless. But let's stop talking about ocean circulation miles away, and let's start talking about what's happening where we live to things that people care about. So that's the second term of the equation, but we have one more term. Because you could have people who are fully worried, you could have people who understand why it matters, but if you don't know what to do and you don't think you can make a difference, most people will do nothing. So the third term is the hands. What can we do about this? And when we look across the US, over 50% of people feel helpless. Over 50% don't know where to start. And most people think the most important thing they can do is recycle. Now, again, it's not just the US. There's many other countries that have the exact same results. So what do we need to do? We need to talk not just about what's happening and why it matters. We need to talk about what? What solutions look like. What solutions are already happening? What solutions could happen? And research shows that this works. So this was a study done a while ago that showed that hope regarding people taking action was associated with greater engagement. Well, in contrast, hope that it wasn't a problem was associated with less engagement. So basically, we have to understand it's a problem, but we also have to understand that there's something we can do about it. And there's so many things we can do about it. I mean, I just took a quick look through. Maybe you know about these, but if you don't, here's some things. So first of all, the state has a climate action plan. Second of all, the state just decided to back the bill forcing data centers to use clean power. Pretty good. There's strategies for nature. There's strategies for unions to invest in clean energy. Princeton has a climate action plan. The state is teaching climate change in almost all subjects, even PE, because of course our sports are being affected by climate change. The university takes action, severed its relationship with BP a couple of years ago, hopefully a few more in the future. And the Nature Conservancy is working on a lot of things related to not just resilience, not just biodiversity, but also making our systems better able to cope with climate change, better able to adapt, better able to take up carbon from the atmosphere. There's great resources, whether it's from Climate Central or from the Rutgers Climate Change Center. And just coming up this next month, you have your phone, so if you want to take a picture, the Nature Conservancy in New Jersey has an Earth Month webinar series, one every week, on positive action for climate and nature in New Jersey. And in June, there is the 2026 New Jersey Climate Change Research Symposium, looking at climate impacts, risks, and mitigation in New Jersey. So solutions are all around us. And what I love the most is that we don't have to pick. We are nowhere near maxing out on win-win-win-win-wins. When you look at solutions like greening low-income communities, those communities can be up to 15 degrees hotter during a heat wave because of racist redlining practices that left those communities with almost no green space. So when you green a low-income community, you are first of all protecting them during heat waves. You are providing a greater buffer for flooding. You are improving people's physical health. The Nature Conservancy did the first clinical trial of nature a couple of years ago with the medical school in Louisville, Kentucky. And they found that when you green a low-income neighborhood, levels of inflammation markers in our blood decrease, just because of exposure to nature in the places where we live. You're also filtering out air pollution, you're providing habitat for biodiversity, you're even taking up a little bit of carbon as that nature grows. You see what I mean? Solutions for climate and nature, they give us cleaner air and cleaner water. Oh, almost 9 million people die from pollution every year. They protect us from disasters, they create healthier ecosystems and healthier food systems. They give us energy that's more affordable, not less. They reduce inequalities, make our cities safer, give us a better world. Who doesn't want that? We truly have good news to share, and people want good news, and they are willing to change if they think that solutions can make a difference. What is the best way to show people that solutions make a difference? To show them about solutions that are already happening, that are already making a difference, right? And not solutions by big, rich, famous people, but solutions by your town, your school, your city, your group, your club, your team, your church, whoever it is working together to make a difference. There's so many examples. So how do we overcome the head-to-heart gap, which social scientists call psychological distance? And then how do we overcome the heart-to-hands gap, which is called lack of efficacy? It turns out that there's something that we're still not doing that is so simple that we just skip right over it. Remember, I left off on this map. Do you think that climate change will affect you personally? But there's a darker blue map. That darker blue map asks, do you ever talk about it, even once in a while? Look at that. 41% of people in this county talk about it or hear about it once in a while. And here's the connection. If you don't talk about it, why would you care? And if you don't care, why would you do anything about it, right? It's so obvious to us that we talk about what we care about, yet we're not talking about this issue. And what research shows is that it's not about the doom and gloom messaging, because most people are like, I don't want to talk about it because it's too depressing, right? How many people think that? I hear that all the time. But research showed, and this is a really amazing study by over 250 authors in 63 countries published 2 years ago, that found that doom and gloom messaging was the worst for motivating action and among the worst for changing climate change beliefs or support for policies. In fact, negative emotions backfired if you just talked about the gloom and the doom. But when we talk about the solutions, another study by Teresa Myers at Yale, or at George Mason, I think actually, she found that when we talk about solutions, people's anger goes down. Talking about solutions is the green bar here. Talking about the scientific consensus is orange. Talking about the causes of climate change is blue. Talking about the impacts or the risks is yellow. Talking about solutions is green. And the 3 little stars there denote statistical significance, in case anybody's wondering. Talking about solutions decreases anger, sadness, and fear, and it increases hope. And this aligns fully with decades of social science research showing that when we talk about something, it literally changes who we see ourselves as. Isn't that interesting? What you talk about changes how you see yourself. It changes what people around you think. That should be obvious, but we don't think about it enough. It changes our perspective of what is normal. Right now, it's not normal to talk about climate change. And if it is, you're talking about the polar bears or the ice sheets. But what if we talked about the heart and the hands? And then that changes our sense of, if I do something, will it make a difference? And if we do something, will it make a difference? And then, if we think it'll make a difference, guess what? People are willing to do something about it. And there's study after study that shows this. Here's one more study. People who learned about the efficacy of their personal action, of how individuals can make a difference, became less willing to engage in the collective actions because focusing exclusively just on our carbon footprint distracts us from the systemic changes we need. So if anybody says, oh, I know it's not recycling, you know what's the next thing they say that they can do? Eat more plants, get an EV, get solar panels, don't take that flight. And don't get me wrong, I do all those things too, but I don't do them because I think that I myself can make a difference. I do them because I want to live true to my values, because I know that we need to act together to fix this. So that's why at the top of every social media account where you can pin something, currently that list is Threads, Blue Sky, and Instagram. On X, I just have a pin saying, find me elsewhere. I have pinned a social science-based list of what we can do according to behavioral science to move the needle. The number one is to have a conversation about why climate change matters and what people can do. The second one is to join together with others to amplify our voice. Then speak with your money. where you keep your money and where you don't keep your money. You don't need millions of dollars. An analysis showed that $1,000 in a savings account that gets invested in fossil fuels produces the equivalent carbon emissions of flying from New York to Seattle every year. Spark ideas for change where you work, where you go to school. Hold politicians accountable, and this is not just about voting. This is about things like getting climate education passed in New Jersey. How did that happen? I can promise you the governor didn't wake up one morning and say, wow, we really need this to happen. That's not how it happened, is it? It happened because individuals used their voices. And then, yes, take personal action, but make your actions contagious by talking about them. I love what Bill McKibben says. He says, the most important thing an individual can do right now is not be such an individual. And how do we not be such an individual? How do we begin not being such an individual? By having a conversation about what? By having a conversation about what's happening. Yes, that's the head. And then what's next? The heart, why it matters. And then what's next? The hands. That is literally the equation that creates hope. And why do we need hope? We need hope because that is what makes us act. People often think these days that hope is wishful thinking. Oh, I hope everything will be okay. Well, I have news for you. If you just hope everything's going to be okay, it probably won't be. That is false hope. That is actually delusion. Hope, according to everything from neuroscience and psychology to theology, hope begins with recognizing just how bad things are. In fact, you can't be truly hopeful if you do not have a clear-eyed view on how bad the situation is. So the clearer-eyed you are, the more grounded you are in beginning that journey into hope. You can't just sort of cover everything up and move on. That's not hope. Hope begins with a clear-eyed view of how bad it is, and then what's the next step? The next step is envisioning a better future that is not guaranteed, but it's possible. And then what's the third step? The third step is figuring out what that path from A to B looks like and what I can do to move us along that path. That is the definition of hope. And the reason why we need that hope is because that's what gives us the courage we need to act. And you need courage these days, don't we? It's not easy to even have a conversation, let alone act. But if we don't have that conversation, why would anybody care? And if nobody cares, why would they ever do anything about it? So that's why I'm still convinced today that the most important thing that the most of us are not doing that we could easily do, whether we are 8 years old or 98 years old, in fact, frankly, it's often easier for somebody who's 8 or 98 to do it than us who are in the middle, is to have a conversation about what? About what's happening, about why it matters, and most of all, about what we can do about it. So that is why, in addition to all the other hats I wear, one of the things I do is every week I have a newsletter called Talking Climate, and it has 3 categories. The first category is good news about climate solutions that are already being implemented. The second category is not so good news about something that affects us, that matters to us. And then the third category is what you can do about it. And when I started this, if you're interested, you're welcome to subscribe since you have your phones out. When I started this, I thought I was going to run out of good news. I seriously did. I was like, well, I'll do this for about 3 months. You know how long I've been doing this for? Next month, it'll be 3 years. And I have been cheating a couple of times. I have been putting more than one piece of good news into the same newsletter. Why am I doing that? Because that's how we generate hope, when we share that information about the head and the heart, but especially about the hands. So at Climate Week in New York and at a bunch of places that I've been this last year, when you get to the end of a panel, they ask you the last question, right? Almost every single time that last question is, what gives you hope? And my answer to that is, that's the wrong question to ask. What gives you hope? Like you're just waiting for it to be delivered to you by what? Like a DoorDash driver or something like that? The question is, what are you doing to create hope? Every single one of us has the ability to create hope. How do we create hope? We create hope by doing something and by sharing that with others. And I think the best words to close with are words from somebody who you probably recognize, Greta Thunberg. She said, the one thing we need more than hope is action. Why? Because once we actually start to do something, hope is all around. So I have one last question for you. And my last question for you is, let's see, Now, when I say climate change, how do you feel? It might take a little longer to think about it. It's not going to change in one 35-minute lecture, I can tell you that. I practice hope myself as if it's an Olympic sport. If hope ever goes to the Olympics, I think I have a good chance of making the team. But the reason I do that, the reason I practice it, is because the more you practice something, the stronger it gets. So even if you think this sounds really sort of, not my comfort zone, not my thing, there's a lot of behavioral science behind this that shows that if you practice that hope, if you generate it, and if you share it with others rather than withdrawing into our own anxiety, that's where change actually begins. So now you can ask us any question you want. Gabe's going to come up. We're going to have a conversation. And please go ahead and enter your questions now that you know how this works. You can use more than one word now. Just make sure it has a question mark at the end. And we want your help. I know some people are still catching up. That's okay. We want your help because you can upvote the questions you most want us to get to. We won't be able to get to all the questions, but if you see a question that's coming up there that you're like, yeah, I really like that question, go ahead and give it a thumbs up and we will get to it. All right, Gabe, come on up.
Well, thank you. Well, Katharine, this is fantastic. And I feel an enormous amount of hope. So enormous, can you feel enormous? I don't know.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Well, we were having a conversation just before this where something really interesting that I've noticed is that with many of us who study this for decades, right? We've been studying this, I've been studying this since the 90s. How about you?
Yeah, the 90s, yeah.
Yeah, that's a long time. We're actually, when we look back at how things have changed, it's actually pretty amazing. So you were saying if 10 years ago you could tell yourself what things would be like today, you would have been amazed. What were some of those things that you feel like has changed far more than you could have imagined in 10 years?
Well, so the global adoption of solar and wind is, it's exponential.
Is your mic on?
Is my mic on? Is it on? Is it on? My mic on?
Gabe.
No, but my voice booms. But how about this? Is my mic on? My mic. This mic is on.
There we go.
All right.
Okay.
So one of the concrete things, and it goes into the bucket of solutions, is the large-scale adoption broadly across the world of wind and solar. Mm-hmm. So is it what, like 30-some% of global power, like electric power generation from wind and solar? And it's growing exponentially, including this year, globally. In the US, even, there was that news on last Thursday. I don't know how many of you read it in New York Times and everywhere else about the rate of new renewable sort of production in the US went down by 17%. It sounds pretty bad, right? How many of you then broke it down and realized, what does that mean? It's not that the rate of production went down by 17%.
Right.
It's the rate of new production went down by 17% from what was before an absolutely unprecedented amount of new solar and wind deployment to 17% reduction of the increase is worse than a 17% increase. But we're living through an administration that's throwing everything they have at this problem, and all they've managed to do is somewhat slow down the rate of increase. So these are the types of things that if you told me 10 years ago that this would be going on, I'd be like, this is great news. I mean, I don't know how you feel about this. I don't know how other people feel about this. Maybe I'm just pessimistic, but I don't think so.
Well, so first of all, we have to understand that our human brain is built to share information that is negative. So that's why so many of the headlines that we see are negative, because more people will click and share them. And that's why so much of the information we see online is negative, because people will share it. So we often don't hear things like that. And some other things we don't hear are, for example, did you know that last year and the year before, China installed more solar energy in a single year than the US has in its entire history? Did you know that last year, China's clean energy exports reduced global emissions of CO2 by 1%? Did you know that 2 years ago, Pakistan installed more solar than the entire country of Canada has in its whole history? And did you know that in the 10 years since the Paris Agreement was signed, the 10-year anniversary was this past December, the projected change in temperature by end of century went down from 4 to 5 degrees C to 2.7 to 3.2 degrees C. Now that's still too high, but that is a big drop in projected temperature in just 10 years. If we can do that in 10 years, how much more can we do in another 10 years? We don't hear about this information, and that's part of why we think we can't do anything and nothing matters. So that's why having that hand conversation is so important, because our news media and even our online ecosystem is not incentivized to have that conversation. But as a result, we are massively increasing that blue worried balloon of people, and the small green activated isn't getting any bigger.
So on that, I think that the upvotedest of questions is a really apropos one. What kinds of solutions can I share with people around?
Gosh, where do we start? Do we have like 3 hours?
You know, I think we want to get to the snacks.
Oh, we want to get to the snacks. Okay, in a nutshell then. So I think of climate solutions using the image of a swimming pool, the above ground swimming pool that I grew up with in my backyard where my toes could just touch the ground. So if you think of the level of water in the swimming pool like the level of CO2 in the atmosphere, back a few hundred years ago, we stuck a giant hose in the swimming pool. And we've been turning that hose up every year. That's our emissions. So the first category of solutions is we have to turn off the hose. And that includes efficiency. Did you know we waste over 60% of the energy we produce? Did you know that about 30% of the energy from fossil fuels is just spent transporting, processing, and extracting fossil fuels? I mean, we are so inefficient. And then transitioning to clean energy, electrification, and reducing emissions from deforestation, agriculture, and other sources. So that's turning off the hose. But the pool has a drain, and the drain is nature. By protecting, restoring, and regenerating nature, we can actually help take up some of that water from the pool while also investing in nature, clean air, clean water, biodiversity, and more. And then there's a third category. The water in the pool is so high that for many of us, our toes don't touch the ground, especially people who have the least resources on the planet, whether they live in Newark or whether they live in sub-Saharan Africa. So we have to adapt, build resilience, learn how to swim. So those are the three categories. But within each of those categories, gosh, every day on the news, there's a new story if you train your news algorithm right. And what I do is I collect those stories, and every week in Talking Climate, I share some of those solutions. So learning about, the port of Long Beach in California has electric ferries, and it's one of the most green ports in the world. I'm like, really? I had absolutely no clue. Learning that an industrial carpet company makes carbon negative carpet, turning carpet salespeople into climate heroes. I had no clue. Learning that you can even buy carbon negative running shoes, didn't know about that. Learning that there's ways to massively reduce food waste and save money, I'm all there for that. Figuring out that I can actually buy all my clothes secondhand now for a lot better price and funner clothes, I'm definitely there for that. So there's all kinds of solutions for almost anything you can imagine, and when you actually start like dipping your toes into, wow, everything that's going on out there, it's hard to hold back. It's actually very exciting.
All right, so based upon sort of your swimming question, and I think I'm going to skip the order. I'm gonna subvert democracy here.
That's totally fine.
So another stolen.
This is expert guidance.
So climate change affects the world disproportionately. For example, there's parts that haven't emitted as much who are feeling a lot of the brunt. How do you give someone in a situation where the disproportionality is different from the disproportionality in somewhere like Princeton, where we've sort of taken advantage of a lot of fossil fuel production to sort of, so how do you inspire hope in recognizing that there's a heterogeneity in the world's experience?
Oh, hugely. So in fact, this question is very, very close to my heart because this is actually the reason I became a climate scientist. My undergrad degree is in astrophysics. My first 5 papers are actually looking at galaxy clustering and things like that. But I had to take a class before I graduated to go to graduate school. And true story, all of my friends, I need a breadth requirement, and my friends were taking a geology class. And I thought, wrongly, that rocks were boring. I now know differently. But instead of that, I took a climate class. And I always thought that climate change was a future issue that would affect plants and animals. And coming from Canada, I figured David Suzuki would fix it, and the rest of us could just sort of watch his documentaries in the meantime. Living in the US, you might think, well, Al Gore will take care of it. But these poor folks have been working on this for a long time, and they can't do it alone. And in that class, I learned that climate change is not a future issue. It's already affecting us today. But even more importantly, I found out that climate change, it is an environmental issue, of course, but it's also a human issue. It is already affecting our food, our water, our health, and more. And most importantly, those who've done the least to cause the problem are bearing the brunt of the impacts. This is true between country, and it is even true, in fact, even more true these days between socioeconomic class in the same country. So how do you inspire hope? It's the connection between hope and action. Do not come along and say, oh, everything's going to be great, because it isn't going to be great. In fact, it isn't great right now. We need solutions that, like I mentioned, they address multiple things at the same time. We can't come into a community that doesn't have clean water and say, oh, let's work on decarbonizing you. No, you need clean water, right? Or you can't go to a neighborhood in a food desert, or a family who just had to sell their daughter into marriage at age 12, or else the whole rest of the family would starve because they have no food because the rains didn't come when they were supposed to, and say, oh, let's make sure you're not using any fossil fuels. That's ridiculous. We need solutions that address issues of food, water, health, and safety today, and issues of climate tomorrow. And so that's why when we prioritize solutions, we have to look for solutions that have the most wins for the most people, especially those who are most impacted today, because climate change is at its heart a profoundly unjust issue. And if we don't incorporate justice into our solutions, we're not building that better world.
Okay, so now I'll follow democracy and get to a question that really many of us struggle with. How do you balance communicating the uncertainty that is inherent in a lot of this with being very clear in your communication? It's not always straightforward to balance this tension between precision and accuracy.
That's a great question. I know that came from a scientist, because that's something we always think about, right? Yeah. So just to be clear, as scientists, we are trained to talk at least 95% about what we don't know or what we just learned, right? If you give a conference presentation, you're not going to get up and give a conference presentation on what we've known for 40 years. If you write an article, yes, you will have a lit review at the beginning, but then you'll have a massive section at the end that talks about all the uncertainties and the factors you didn't consider and what needs to be done next. That's just how we communicate as scientists. If we want people to take action, though, we need to flip the script. When we talk to people about an issue like climate change, we often massively underestimate how much we already know for sure and have known for a very long time. So what do we know for sure? We know for sure that climate is changing. We know for sure that humans are responsible. In fact, the most likely number for how much humans are responsible for the current warming is greater than 100%. The range is actually, what, like 96 to 113% or something like that. But it's likely to be greater than 100% because natural factors are causing us to cool right now. We also know that the majority of the impacts are negative. And you see there, I actually incorporated uncertainty. I just said the majority. I didn't say, well, you could look at northern Canada and blah, blah, blah. No, I just said the majority are negative. And this is what we need to know to act. There's always more to learn. As scientists, we will never come to the end of what we need to learn about the climate system. It's as complex as the human body. And I personally would be super excited about being able to just go back to study the natural variability of the climate system, like you do too in a lot of your research. But first of all, we have to fix this issue. And to fix this issue, frankly, we already knew enough 100 years ago. We did. So communicating, in fact, the Yale program on climate change communication has identified 6 things people need to know. They need to know it's real, it's us, it's serious, experts agree. If you're counting, that's 4. And then we also need to know others care and there is hope. Those are the things we need to know to be activated. Pretty simple.
Okay, so there is one question that I'm going to get to in a second, but here I have a question sort of for me and thinking about, I see PHS students, right? And we have amazing undergrads here and graduate students and postdocs, people who are sort of honing their skills to make a big impact in the world. They're here, presumably, these students, because they want to make an impact, not just get out of school early, right? And you guess you didn't have to get out of school early to get here. No, okay, good. It was testing day.
Isn't that what we all want? Don't we all want to make a difference?
So we all want to make a difference. So people that are picking up skills and experience right now.
Great question.
What do you recommend as something to focus on? Are there sort of particular things that they should be learning, or anything, because we need to throw everything at this, or what?
I'm so glad you asked that question, because I have a very strong opinion about this. So if you want to make a difference, if you want to have an impact, what should you be studying? What skills should you be acquiring? Who you are is a different person than the person sitting right beside you, right behind you, and right in front of you. You have different interests, you have different abilities, you have different passions, you have different potential. You already have different life experiences. You have different values. And so my number one piece of advice is to follow your heart and study whatever it is that you're passionate about, because we need everyone when it comes to this. So we scientists have been at it for a really long time, as you could see by those pictures, right? And frankly, at this point, if I was going back to school, I don't think I would study physical science anymore. As you can see from what I was talking about, I'd probably get into more of the behavioral sciences. But at the same time, we need people who are artists, who create things that we react to emotionally, to understand the risks and the opportunities at a different level than data and facts and information will provide it. We need people who understand policy. We need really good lawyers. We need medical health professionals who can draw that connection between what we're doing to our shared home and how that affects every aspect of our health, from the unborn to our last years. We need people who are figuring out how to make the food systems sustainable, how to make clothing and fashion sustainable. Like I mentioned, how to make carpet sustainable, how to ensure we have enough food and enough infrastructure for people on this planet. We need people in every single area making a difference. And so whatever you're passionate about, study that and then bring your unique skill set to make a difference. Every day I work with people who have degrees in almost every field you can imagine, and some who don't. And every one of those people is bringing something totally unique to the table that we can't do this alone, but if we do it together, I really think we can make a difference.
So that's fantastic. And I have, okay, so there's this question that's been hanging up here. It has both the most upvotes and the most downvotes, which makes it perfect.
Oh.
And so I'm gonna translate it into what so to what extent do sort of structural problems in politics, both nationally, locally, and globally, have to be solved in order for us to address this, right? Is it a precondition for us to make headway? And to what extent are there structural issues with investment, or are there opportunities through investment to make a difference here?
There are massive structural issues, massive. I touched very briefly on one of them, which is political polarization. And that is on the rise in many countries, not just the United States. But I didn't even mention the fact that our entire economic system is constructed for a flat earth. What do I mean by that? I mean that we have an economic system that assumes that there's essentially infinite resources to go into the system. And we assume that all of the waste, pollution, garbage, and heat-trapping gases we produce can effectively be put far away where they don't matter because we haven't put a value on them. And that mental construct is only possible on an infinite flat planet. So can you imagine? We are all effective flat earthers in the way our economy operates, and that doesn't work. It sort of worked when we just had population in the millions rather than the billions. Not really. I mean, back then, whenever you had a concentration of people, there was massive pollution problems. But now with 8 billion people, it's very clear it doesn't work. We have to come to grips with the reality that we live on a round planet, that we share with 8 billion other people. So yes, there are massive structural uncertainties. Don't even get me started on fossil fuel subsidies. The fact that those companies, their revenues went up, their subsidies went up at a time when climate impacts are soaring. How does that make any sense? But here's the thing. Whenever anybody says we have to fix X first, I usually agree with whatever X is. There's a lot of things that we need to fix with the world. But if you think we have to wait to address climate change until after we fix that, good luck. We've already lost the battle. Rather, I'm really convinced, and there's a really interesting emerging social science research on societal tipping points. We study physical tipping points. Those are mostly all really bad. But societal tipping points could be really good because society can change really quickly. But what happens is it's like pressure building up behind a dam, and the dam doesn't move, and the dam doesn't move, and the dam doesn't move, and then one day it breaks. And we actually saw that happen. We've seen it happening with women getting the vote. We've seen it happen with civil rights. We saw it happen with apartheid ending in South Africa. So the act of addressing many of the challenges that confront us today, if we go about it the right way, we will be changing the system at the same time. We don't have the luxury to do one or the other, but there are so many opportunities for low-hanging fruit that do both at the same time that I think our binary thinking is often what gets in our way. We're like, well, I'm just working on A, so I can't work on B. Climate change is not a separate issue. It's the whole in every other bucket. Whether you care about equality, justice, poverty, education, food, water, nature, whatever it is you care about, climate change is the hole in your bucket. And so if we all get together and patch those holes, we can change the system while we do it.
All right. Well, that and time tells me that is such a fantastic answer, and I'm going to leave it at that, and I will invite the audience again to thank Katharine for a phenomenal discussion. Thank you so much, and thank you all for coming to this and taking time to be active participants. We're going to be having snacks outside to celebrate this and share with each other our hopeful and sort of encouraged emotions. So let's get on it.
All right, thank you.